Good evening, Nam fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons remain undefeated. The streak is now at 17 games in a row, and we are now 2 games and percentage clear on top of the ladder. Joining me tonight to discuss our latest win is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Ben the Man. Good evening to all the NARM supporters out there. 17 straight wins it is. When will it end? Well, unfortunately, you're not going to find out on this podcast.
Yeah, I've got my daughters sort of involved in the whole streak that we got going, and they always ask me how many more do we need to win to have the record, and it's a bit early to sort of go with that because we're still a little bit off. Also joining us tonight, Bin Man, who is hopefully over his bout of COVID. Good evening, Bin Man. How are you feeling?
I'm good, thanks, Andy. How you going? Good evening, Demonlanders. Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. And playing the devil's advocate and spoiler here, George, it's funny you should say that. You won't hear it here because I was just thinking this afternoon to remind loyal D's fans that we'll almost certainly have a loss around the bye time. So it's hashtag we're doing the same things as last year, is that we will run out of gas, and I would be really surprised if we don't lose a game around the bye period on the other side of it, this side of it. And we're at that point last year in the season where pretty much the mirror part of the season where we struggled a little bit against Adelaide, played a lower team and lost that game. We beat the Roos. And then we came up against a contender the next week in the Dogs, and we're up for that. And we've got Freo, so it almost mirrors it exactly. Then we roll into the bye. And there's no doubt in my mind we'll be loading up like we did last year, and we'll come out physically taxed and tired, and we'll be ripe for the picking on the other side of the bye.
How many hats are you going to put on that, Ben Man?
I won't put too many hats on us losing. A good thing I didn't put a hat on Bedford playing, although he did get selected in the 23 and he ended up playing, and I'm going to get some credits in the bank for picking Melksham a few weeks back that he was on the cusp of selection. So I got some hat protection there. And Dunstan didn't get selected. Oh, no, he did, didn't he?
No, he did.
That's right. We're all winners.
He did. But he only came in. He didn't get selected, actually. He came in for Viney. Did he not?
Yes, he came in for Viney, yep.
So everyone bet each
Well,
one.
he still got selected, didn't he? Just not on the Thursday night. So
yes.
I think you should buy some more hats.
Yes, let's get into the match wrap up. I was lucky enough to watch this match with Demonland royalty. George's designated seat wasn't far from mine, and as the crowd was thinly dispersed and scattered around the stadium, there was plenty of seats available. So we watched the game together, and I can now confidently claim that between the three of us guys, we've never lost a game that we have watched in each other's company against the Kangaroos. B-Man and I, of course, watched the preseason scratch match against North out at Casey together, and the two matches couldn't have been further apart in terms of the way that we played. The D's easily accounted for an undermanned Roos that day and took out the match by 88 points, and many D's fans would have gone into this match expecting or hoping for much of the same result. However, that was not the case, and the Roos put up a little bit more fight than we saw in February and took it right up to the Demons in terms of endeavour. But at the end of the match, they were no match for us. It's no surprise that the Demons' game plan and system suffered a major blow with Ed Langdon being subbed out. The majority of our run and link up out of defence goes through Ed Langdon. His elite gut running up and down the wing is an important part of the way we play. So taking that piece of the puzzle out of the contest is of course going to have an impact. And at this time, we sort of know the extent of his injury. They're saying there's no internal damage, but he does have a broken rib and trained probably with no little contact, but I reckon he's unlikely to play this week.
This week.
This week.
That went bad quick.
Slip of the tongue. He's taken that heavy knock. I reckon he'll miss 1 to 2 weeks. Definitely. It's a huge loss, and we'll talk more about how we can cover that loss later in the show. Another talking point later in the show will be our inaccuracy in front of the big sticks with 30 shots to 13. You'd certainly expect a bigger winning margin. And then when you drill down further into the statistics and see that we've had 40 more inside 50s, 74 to 34, you start to get a picture that despite the dominance, we aren't making the most of our opportunities. The connection with our forwards was just not up to scratch, and is something that we'll need to work on with matches against some of our top 4 competition in the coming weeks. In the middle, Clarry was outstanding, racking up a PB for most disposals, his PB for most disposals in a game, 45 possessions, 22 contested, 13 inside 50s, 11 clearances, 6 score involvements, 6 tackles, 5 marks, 5 intercepts, 22 pressure acts, and 621 metres gained. He got the 10 coaches' votes, and I can confidently say that he'll get the 3 Brownlow votes as well for this game. Binman will speak more about Clarry later. Tommy Sparrow continued to impress with his development, filling in for the void created by the withdrawal of Viney, and George will talk more on that later. A rock-solid defence took another under-60 scalp, which seems to have become my yardstick to assessing their performance. Lever's aerial intercept skills and May's physical one-on-one strength were once again hallmarks of this wonderful defensive unit, May with 8 intercepts and Lever with 7. The victory takes us 2 games and a healthy percentage clear of second spot. And after a little bit of a tussle, we were able to easily account for this for a cellar dweller, particularly without premiership stars in Viney, Salem, Hibberd, Harms and Langdon. With upcoming matches against Fremantle and Sydney and then Brisbane after the bye, I think we'll get a better sense of where we're truly at. Guys, any other general comments you want to make about this match? Big Man, I'll start with you, and then George, you jump in when he's done.
Yeah, I thought a bit similar to the previous week. It was a really entertaining game, and I was reflecting afterwards is that we're in an interesting position as a team because I don't think you could accuse any of the teams we've played so far not to bring their best effort. And, you can imagine the way the coach or any coach, Noble or anyone coming up against us who is not one of the top 4 clubs, for instance, on the ladder or a genuine premiership contender, they would frame any match against us as an opportunity, wouldn't they? It's like it's a free hit to an extent, but the messaging would be, what have you got to lose? You go out there, play your hardest, the old, if they cut, they bleed, they all pull their pants on the same way, all of that sort of palaver is that, the message, no doubt, from Noble would have been what we expect from you is the minimum threshold of effort. And I think that's what you gave. I wrote on Demonland before, if they don't bring that sort of effort to the match, then we'll flog them by 100 points. Or if they could only maintain that for half a game of footy. And credit to them where it's due. I thought their effort was terrific. They stuck to their guns as far into the game as they could. They wilted a bit in the end, but I thought their intensity at the ball was first class. It's really interesting watching us because I was really, really thrilled about how our intensity was. All our numbers were where they should have been. The way Goody talks about the numbers that reflect the Melbourne game, our contested possessions were strong. Our attack on the ball was strong. Our 1%ers was there. What was a little bit off, and I I've not played elite level sport, but I'm guessing the best players in any sport rise to the best. Someone plays better in a grand final in terms of being mentally switched on than they do in the middle of winter against a bottom team. Is so that that we looked a bit off to my eye early on, but not in effort and not in intensity. We looked a bit off with our skills and not quietly switched on. And having not played at sort of elite sport, I've played plenty of sport and know myself just within that sort of thinking. There's times when you're mentally more switched on than others. And I think the more amateur you are, the more obvious that was certainly the case. I played a lot of cricket. That was always the case. And you could just tell when you were on more. And I think it felt like we weren't on. That's a bit what George was saying last week, is about the challenge for a full season to stay in the zone. But what was most impressive, I thought, was that we brought our intensity as well. And I just wanted to reflect on that comment from last week about West Coast. I said the same about West Coast. I watched the West Coast Suns game, GWS game, because I backed GWS with a logic that West Coast would drop their bundle, and you've got a team under a new coach who are going to do anything but drop their bundle and go for it. And I'm not sure if you guys watched that. It was an appalling performance by West Coast. Nothing at all similar to the way they played against us in terms of effort or application or intensity. It was literally like a Melbourne training run would have been fiercer than that. I have no doubt whatsoever. GWS scored something ridiculous, like 79% of times they went inside 50, their own 50 they scored. So my point really is that we haven't played a team yet who's done that, who's just simply not turned up. And West Coast, after their terrific effort against us, didn't turn up against the GWS. And North, I thought North might not. I thought they might turn up their toes a little bit. So I was really pleased for North, because I really like North as a footy club, and I want them to do well. But also pleased for us, because we don't want that sort of game that GWS got given against West Coast. What sort of practice is that for us? So, all power to every club, I reckon, that comes out every week with full effort and full intensity, because that's what's going to keep our edge sharp as we move through this season.
It was interesting, wasn't it? I think the important factor in this game was that how well our systems held up when required, even in the absence of was it 5 premiership players, and bringing in players who basically not only weren't part of that premiership, but they weren't even at the club at the same time in some cases. So that was fantastic to watch. The return of Lever and May in the back line, they were superbly solid. But the other thing I noticed with North was they were far more physical.
Yeah.
And it was not just physical legally, it was physical illegally as well. There was a couple of times when Petrarca was obviously had taken a punch straight to the guts in the middle. He was down behind play a couple of times because he was being targeted. The tackle of Taron Thomas on Langdon was telling. It was just that physical aspect that they brought to the game. Unfortunately, it's going to happen when you've got a lack of skill. You've got to come out with something to show the fans, and that's how they came out. But yeah, I was really impressed with the way that our systems just held up so beautifully. The midfield was completely dominant. The forward line didn't capitalise on the simple number of balls that the mids were getting into the forward line. But hey, at the end of the day, we still won by 47 points or whatever. So another win in the bank.
Anything else, boys, before we move on?
Nothing jumps to mind that we won't cover, I reckon.
In tonight's tactical talk, George, you wanted to talk about the outside 5 on the mark rule and how more and more teams are employing this tactic. So you want to take that away?
Yeah, it's just an observation from the last couple of weeks. The best exponents of it at the moment are the Bulldogs. Not surprisingly, they seem to be able to exploit rules better than any other team. Got them a premiership with their throwing the ball capabilities, but they're using it again to advantage now. The umpires are allowing you don't have to stand the mark if you're outside 5. Of course, that's what the rule says. However, the umpires aren't policing it all that well, and I think the Bulldogs have woken up to that. Firstly, they're not 5 metres away, so you can grab a couple of metres there. You're allowed to move, which is the whole basis of staying outside 5 on the mark. It enables you to go back to what was the standard before, where you limit the opportunities of the kicker to be able to move the ball to either side. Once you're standing still, you're completely shot. They can move it either way. They've got all opportunity to move it either way, and you're not going to tackle them in any way, shape or form. Outside 5, you've got a chance of running straight at them with speed. But the other thing is the umpires aren't stopping people moving forward. Even if they're out at 5, when the player starts to move in for the kick, you watch the supposed person on the mark move in closer, and the umpires are not calling at the moment. Like I said, the Bulldogs have realised it. They are almost exclusively staying outside 5 simply because they've realised that firstly, it won't be police, but it's also of far greater advantage to them not to be standing still on the mark. So expect to be a lot occurring a lot more in the future. The other teams will pick up on it pretty quickly, I would imagine. I don't know that we are using it to the same extent, and certainly not to the same extent. I think we're much more in your face as a team because our guys are usually up right at the contest all the time, so they don't get the opportunity to move backwards. But it'll be interesting to see what tactics we employ against Freo this week, who tend not to play on and depend on a lot of possession and structure. So it'll be interesting to see what tactics we employ against their attacking mode. So one to watch out for this week.
It's interesting because I've been noting that a few teams are doing it. As you said, the Dogs almost look like a couple of weeks ago it was a team rule, and they were a couple of times they were caught half in and half, not being able to work out to go forward. And it occurred to me that one, I don't see the logic of doing it. I understand part of it because particularly the moving on the mark and being able to crib inside the corridor. But essentially you're giving the opposition 10 metres to run into to move it forward. And Melbourne don't do it. We do it when the only time we do it is when we're on the that's coming from the boundary, and sometimes they go in the 5 metres. Like the really good example last year was in round 23 when right at the end of the game, Petrarca elected to Guthrie was kicking it in, and instead of manning the mark, he elected to go 5 metres back. We do it then in that circumstance, and occasionally when we can't get up to the mark or whatever. But as opposed to the Dogs, we're almost always up on the mark. And I was thinking, it's funny you should put this one on the agenda, George, because I was just thinking over the weekend, I just don't understand why it's useful. And Melbourne don't do it because we want to stop them getting easy kicks down the ground. And if you can balance up and take 2 or 3 steps towards the man who's nominally on the mark, who's now 5 metres in front of you, you can not only balance up and get good distance on your kick, you've got much more options. It's a bit like giving a midfielder an unpressured kick into the forward 50. It seems, and because the other thing too is one of the things that we've got better at this year is to take the time to take the step back so you're not kicking into the man in the mark. But even that act is more difficult to do if you've got the player come right up on the mark and stand on the mark. What we do, which is interesting, is that it's a real Melbourne thing that I've noticed now other teams have picked up, is the very dramatic keep moving forward. In fact, almost the opposite philosophy to what you were talking about there, George. It's keep moving forward to the umpire says stand, and then make a big show of pointing towards the spot on the ground that is to stand, which takes another couple of seconds out. But by the time they've done that, they've cribbed a fair way forward. And like it's almost a philosophical difference because Melbourne don't want to concede a centimetre turf. Whereas if you multiply that over the number of marks there are, like where times that the umpire sets a mark in a Dogs game, it might be, 30 times, 40 times. That's accumulatively, that's a lot of territory you're giving up. Melbourne, how our game is built on making territory. Why would you give even 5 metres up? It's a really interesting. More and more teams are doing it. Dogs are taking it to the nth degree. But yeah, it's a difference, isn't it?
Would it be because Melbourne's also got structures ahead of the ball that don't create the opportunities for the opposition players to be able to utilise that extra space?
Yeah. I mean I think so. I mean that's part of it. It's really noticeable how different we are to other teams who are doing it. And I'd really like to hear what Beveridge, because they're the ones who are most doing it. I'd really like to hear what his logic is because, they're not so much of a territory team. So maybe philosophically it's not but, it is a curious one. But yeah, spot on. The other thing is half the time they're not 5 metres. They're closer to on the mark and they're moving all over the spot. They seem to have stopped that whole stand thing completely. Their focus is on descent. So, yeah, it's curious, I reckon.
Yeah, definitely with the actual stand rule when they're not outside 5. There are a lot of times I've seen where players who have the ball go to kick it, and the guy who's meant to be standing still has already moved before the umpires call play on, and the only ones getting sort of busted for it are the really, really obvious where they move before the players kick the ball. But other than that, yeah, they've forgotten about it. Positives. Each week we take a positive and an improvement out of the match or for somewhere in the round. And tonight my positive is our strong ladder position. Big man, last year you talked about how important it is in banking early wins. When you look at our fixture, particularly in light of the way that the chips have fallen this year in terms of the form of our opposition, our early fixture is certainly more favourable than our run home. And I'm not suggesting that we've played no one. However, to date, we've only beaten 2 top 8 sides and we've beaten 8 out of the 10 bottom 8 sides. Bottom 10 sides. There are 12 games left, and from here on out, we play 7 matches against teams in the top 8, and our remaining games against teams in the bottom 8 are against Collingwood times 2, Adelaide, Bulldogs, and Port. 3 of those matches are either interstate or in Geelong. It's a tough run home, and we'll certainly highlight where we're at. That's why my positive is our strong ladder position, 2 games and a healthy percentage clear. We've made hay whilst the sun shone, and now we need to turn that hay into some bread, make a meal of the rest of the competition for the rest of the year.
That's a tortuous analogy there.
That was my best Kelly Underwood.
Right. Pickett did kick a goal from the pocket, so it is a remarkably strong position. And with Freo going down and Brisbane going down, what's that now? 8 points to second. Now, is anyone going to complain about our percentage? What is it, 12% higher than the next nearest?
It's near. We're 161, I believe.
It's 149.
143, I think even. It's nearly, let's have a look at the ladder. They're 143, we're 161. We're nearly 20%.
Yeah, it's remarkable numbers, isn't it, in terms of at this stage of the season? And
yep.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was, apologies to whoever it was on Demonland in one of the threads today, noted that of the 96 games remaining for the teams currently in the 8, nearly half of them are against other teams in the 8 to the end of the season. So having games won in the one column for us is another big positive, because the teams beneath us and us included are going to start playing off against each other. So there may well be some moves into the 8 from a few of the teams out, because teams will knock each other off. But in one sense, nobody's got an easy run for the next 12 games or so.
Yeah, I think Carlton's got the easiest draw, but they still have to play Melbourne. They still have to play Brisbane. They're playing Freo again. They've got to play Geelong. So they've still got a tough draw.
And, the criticism that, it's probably criticism is too strong a word, but the sort of commentary that Melbourne hasn't played anyone yet, because it's sort of a weird way of trying to pot a hole in a way, because we've now beaten Tigers, who are in the 8, and many are, again, back on the Tigers bandwagon and talking about, well, can they push higher? We've beaten the Saints, who I rate and are in the top 4. And we've beaten the Doggies, who are on the march again, and were, of course, last year's runners-up. So it's not. And I rate the Suns pretty highly as well. So and they're it could well be that they end up making the 8 as well. So I think that if you look at who we've beaten and how we've beaten it, our form stacks up. Equivalent really to last year. I mean, we beat Geelong, Sydney last year, and they were both ended up being in the 8 at this equivalent stage. And then in round 11, we knocked off. Was it round 10 or round 11? We knocked off the Dogs. So, but 11. They were the first top team that we were challenged by, because they were unbeaten at that point too, I think, weren't they?
So who was that?
Last year when we played the Dogs, both teams were unbeaten, I think.
We lost the week before to Adelaide, and they had lost before then.
Yeah,
but it was virtually, we both lost one game, and winner took top spot.
Isn't it amazing how 2021 is absolutely etched in our memory every single game?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not for Bin Man.
Yeah, that's right.
COVID brain.
Yeah, that's right. It's been going on for a long time. Before I caught COVID as well, funnily enough.
George, you want to talk about Tom Sparrow?
Tom Sparrow, yeah, one of Bin Man's favourite players. He finally got his name right after a while. So, yeah, and we said this last year, and I think it was one of Bin Man's comments. Where have you been hiding this guy? Well, he's been hiding in plain sight, and he is absolutely slotted beautifully into the midfield. Still only what is he now, 2021 maybe at the moment. 20 disposals in this game, 11 kicks, 9 marks, 6 tackles, 7 clearances, and yet he only played 70% game time. So we're still holding him on the periphery a little bit. 8 contested possessions and 5 inside 50s. He's a beautiful kick, and he's has built out, I think, solidly in his body now that he can take an ever-increasing workload that's necessary as a replacement for Viney. I think it was he's the new grunt man inside. Viney will come back, of course, but we've got the next one in the wings ready to replace him in the future. But Tom's creating his own position in the side, ever reliable now. Some of his efforts, I think, there was an effort towards the end of the game where he's in no position to get to a contest, and yet he threw himself absolutely wholeheartedly to spoil and get the ball. I think he got the ball out of bounds, but yeah, he's doing exactly what Goodwin wants the rest of the team to be doing. He's not going anywhere. There's no questions every week now about whether he'll be in or out of the side. He's just there all the time. But really pleased with his progress, and a real credit to the development that's gone into him and a lot of other players who are just as equally young, but we're now creating the next generation of inside mids, which is frightening for the opposition.
Yeah, I usually would have panicked had Viney gone out, as a late sort of withdrawal, but with a guy like Sparrow, I've got total confidence that he can go in and take over that role. Obviously, I prefer Viney being in the team and have Tom still learning the craft and being able to slot in when others are having a break. But yeah, I've got plenty of confidence that he can take that role. Big man, anything? Oh, you're on mute, big man.
He's ferocious at the ball too. I just love his competitiveness and his want for the footy. And he's the other thing too is he's such a neat kick and gets great depth off one or two kicks. And in a team that's so focused on territory, that ability to launch it off one step and get distance is a really important feature he's got. But I just love the way he goes about his footy. He's hard as a cat's head, is he? And he just loves to play footy, it looks like. So him and Jordan are both players that are, I think, in the similar. They're not exactly the same type of player, obviously, but they could both come under the category of where'd you find him, because when you get the sort of the glitziness of Cozzy and all of the things, and even the hard running of someone like Langdon, you can easily forget the meat and potatoes type of footballers. And he's a great counterbalance to Viney, I reckon. You don't lose. You're not losing a huge amount when he comes in to replace, gives Viney a chop out.
No, not at all. Big man, I rattled off Clarry's stats before from the game. He had a fantastic game. You wanted to talk about him.
Yeah, I won't go into massive detail. I just thought, I was just reflecting actually on Demonland. Redleg had put up a comment, basically how good is Oliver, and that he mentioned that he was so, in terms of this game, he was so far best on ground for us. I'm just reading from Redleg's post that he may have got all 6 votes from the umpires, and I, for one, would say that wasn't even enough. I've never seen anyone do some of the things he does. We had Robbie's the most skilled player that Redleg had seen. And we now have Clarry, the best contested player he's ever seen, who I'm simply in awe of and grateful that he's one of ours. Thank you, Jason Taylor. And it got me thinking, is that he's arguably the best contested possession player ever already. And I was reflecting that I think that, and we've talked about it a lot, and we talked about it last year, but under Uze, he's really added something that it's taken his game to another level. And it's starting to get to a level, I think, if he maintains it, and his desire to win and play suggests that there's no sort of, I've got no doubt he will maintain it. It'll put him in not just the discussion about the best ever D's player, but, you know, I know it's a big call, but he's starting, he's going to, if he keeps this trajectory, he'll be in the conversation about being one of the all-time greats. I know it's a big call, but just some of his numbers are crazy. If you look at, you know, his results in the Bluey, he's won 3 Blueys. He won it last year in a premiership season. He's 24. He's turning 25 in July. He's got to be probably, I'd say, the raging favourite to win it this year. I'm not sure what you guys think about that.
Yeah, he'll be first or second, but most likely first.
Yeah, so he's every chance.
The only real danger is if Petrarca takes points from him.
Yeah, exactly, or Gorney, but, you know, the way he's racking up the numbers, he's must be raging favourite to have his 4th, hopefully another premiership and maybe a Norm Smith. You know, he's made 2 All-of-Australian teams. He should have made more, really. And he's a lock, you'd reckon, for the next 5. So he could end up with 6, 7, 8 All-Australians on top of the Bluey. And however, you know, he'll probably get a bit more. He'll do well in the Brownlow this year because he seems to have fixed his attitude up a bit. And I reckon there's a lag between, if you're going to fix your attitude, the umpires have always hated him, I reckon. But he's much more respectful. He dives less often, and he's in there. He seems to have been more disciplined this year. And the other thing I was reflecting on, and I posted about this today, is that it's sort of, my comment about Uze is, he, in a way, you could suggest that Oliver's had an influence in how the game's played. You would have heard David King, I'll talk a bit about later, but talk about these players who are driving from the contest seems to be one of his things that he's banging on about this year. And we talked about that shift last year a lot, about Oliver's, you know, would get 35, 40 possessions, but 20 of them would be those sorts of handballs in the back half or outside of the contest where he would get it out to a runner, but he was still, Lee Matthews, who I hate a lot, but watching him, you know, he was an amazing footballer to watch, and he was most amazing for me in terms of his ability to power from the contest, particularly the later part of his career when he was predominantly a small forward, albeit like a key small power forward. And Dusty's similar in the way his ability to burst from the contest, and he's, to be honest, Dusty's fairly similar in some style, the way Lee Matthews plays. But, you know, that Matthews, as he got older and they put him in the permanent full sort of like forward pocket, half forward flanker, he would just, defenders couldn't go with him in. He would power out of the contest. He did that as a little bit as a mid, but not more just strength at the ball. But under Uze, Oliver's taken that Matthews template to another level by applying that same power out of a contest to every contest he's involved in, you know, as a mid. So he's, you know, the numbers he's getting is, you know, he can get clearances, but it's a bit like, well, there's clearances and there's clearances. And his clearance is he's still winning as many contested balls as he ever had. But now instead of handballing to a receiver, he's driving from that contest. He gets 3 or 4 powerful strides in, balances up, and if he doesn't handball to an outside runner who's going past him, he drives at 50 metres forward easily. And so with the run, these 2 or 3 running yards, he's got a 60-metre gain from a contest. Now, he's not the only one who does that. We talked about Captain Jack just before. He does it as well. But doing that's fundamental to our game plan. And the thing I was reflecting on is that I think he's been the one who's influencing. Players like Neil now do that much more often, and this is what King's been noting. Cripps is doing that much more often. Those powerful midfielders are now expected to get territory and burst from those clearances, and he's been doing that. And he's been doing that now for a season and a half, and it just makes him such a, not just a player who gets numbers, but incredibly damaging. And that's the shift he's been in the game. I tried to find FootyWise, a really good site for looking at comparing players, and it wasn't quite as illuminating as I thought, because like I compared him to Neil, who's really the closest thing to Oliver. I'd rate Neil as the sort of closest in terms of his player rankings. He's got some very similar numbers, Neil, and when you match them side by side, the Clarry's got him slightly in contested possessions, and in fact, the numbers are pretty equal. But I don't think Neil's quite got the same power out of a contest. I mean, it's a pretty good comparison. We've been blessed with those midfielders. But the other one that really I thought about and couldn't find a comparison with, who he reminds me a lot of, Ollie, is Michael Voss. He plays in that way where he's uncontainable when he gets going, but he's also got that. The other thing that had occurred to me, the comparison with Michael Voss, is his attitude. He just wants to win games of footy. He wants to win that football. And it doesn't matter what time of the game, doesn't matter when it is. Oliver, if you put him between, a player between him, he'll go through any player to get to the footy. And that combination of all of those things, and on the addition, he's using the footy much better, and his hands forward to contest are elite, as they always have been, and the speed at which he releases it. I just think we're seeing something incredible, and arguably one of the greatest D's players, certainly.
At the moment, he's second in the league for disposals, first for clearances, second for contested possessions, and third for score involvements. Pretty nice stats, but I think he still is a little underrated in the wider AFL community. Commentators, other supporters, I don't think they rate him amongst. I mean, we're talking that he could be amongst one of the greats of the AFL, and I really don't think he's getting that respect that's where he's headed towards.
Well, I think he'll get there.
I think, I don't know. I think, but
but do you know what I mean in terms of how he's changed in the time we've, even he's been at the club, and I give Uze a lot of credit for that. But that it's now like, people are talking about this power style, but they often talk about Petrarca. They're not talking about Oliver. He's every bit as powerful out of a contest as Petrarca, and he's got more of a hunt for the ball than Petrarca almost. I mean, I'm not in any way suggesting Petrarca's not also a star, but he's the one that it's actually him, not Petrarca, that the Neils and the Cripps are basing their game on. Sorry, George, you wanted to.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Because we've got a guy like Petrarca playing alongside him, it takes away a little bit of the focus when you go to Carlton, for example. You notice Cripps because he's basically the solitary power mid in there, but we've got two of them.
Yeah, well, Walsh is not bad, but
yeah, he's not bad, but he's not the same power.
Not the same power. Not that that's right. Yeah,
yeah. But the other thing that really struck me in this game with Oliver was quite often, on a number of occasions, he was in a position, particularly in the middle, where he had absolutely no right to get the ball. Absolutely no right at all. He'd be up against 2 or 3 North Melbourne players, and you sort of look at it and you go, oh, yeah, sure, they're going to get it out. They've got more numbers around the ball. And how he did it, I do not know. You could sit and watch it again and again. He just gets the ball out where others are incapable of doing it, and then he manages to get it onto his foot. The big changes occurred in the last 18 months or so with him. He is so powerful. He can get the kick away to advantage the team, whereas before it might have been a handball and further contest had occurred. Now with his power inside. It's creating so many more opportunities up the field. But like I said, he had no right to get the ball on a number of those occasions, and he's just devastating. And I thought after the game, he might have got 40 possessions, and Mitchell at Hawthorn got 39 or something. And I know which player I'd prefer to have playing in the middle for us out of those two. One's all numbers and the other's all results.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that, whether it's Uze, I mean, I've no doubt that Uze is a factor in this, but the fact that he's getting forward of the contest and he is getting some space before he's releasing it, so he's kicking more, is that the other thing that he's brought to his game, he was always a pretty good kick, but because he wasn't kicking from in front of the contest, he was often kicking from behind it, which means dinky kicks or lateral, or you can't really sink your foot into it. Is how smart he is. He's still got a bit of a technical thing with his kicking, he skies it a bit, but he's got the natural skill of a footballer who can put it into the right space for someone to move on to. And so that combination of the metres gains that he's now getting is really the value add that we get from that is he gets depth on his kick. So 50, 60 metres, no probs, and that it's pretty well positioned in where it, where he's putting it. He's such a clever player. Like part of what you're saying, George, is that ability to get the ball. Is the other thing that it's sort of, because he's so powerful, is that I forget what part of the game, but there was a moment where he got the ball because he read where it was going. It wasn't just, I'm going to go get the footy and be the most powerful person in this and want it more than anyone else coming close to it. Because he does something similar, he went to where the footy was going to go, and so was ahead of the contest slightly from the other player. So he was already at the ball before his direct opponent had reacted to that's where it's going. And again, that just shows to me he's got all of the stuff that I just talked about, plus he's got really super high footy IQ. So he's the complete package, really. Maybe he can't kick left foot so well.
45 possessions is just insane. Most disposals for the Ds. Greg Wells had 48 in 1980. Oliver's had the 45. Greg Wells also had 45 possessions in 73. Oliver had 44 in 2019, and Travis Johnston in 2007 had 42. It's very rare that we see players getting that 40s, and you've got to remember that Greg Wells and even Travis Johnson probably played when there were 25 minutes plus time on quarters, so they've had 20 minutes extra to rack up those possessions over Oliver. And then you look at I always thought 30 possessions is a lot, and that's what Petrarca got, but it's like peanuts compared to what Clarry got. It's just insane.
And the other thing, like in terms of damage, if you talk about players who damage, I mean, you mentioned Mitchell, George, but even I think, well, Bontempelli is probably the other one, obviously, it goes without saying. But so, the top four, if you leave track out of the conversation, top four mids, apart from track, Oliver, Bontempelli, Neil, and Cripps, I reckon. And Bontempelli averages 4.8 inside 50s. Lachie Neale 5, Patrick Cripps also 5, which is great. That's terrific. You're getting really good value out of your power forwards. Clayton Oliver averages 6.6 inside 50s. That's statistically, that's quite a big margin over a season where he's getting against the other sort of comparable elite midfielders who are power players like him. He's getting almost 2 more inside 50 kicks a game. I mean, that's quite incredible. If particularly if you compare it to the Cripps, because Carlton are getting a lot more centre clearances than us from inside 50. So presumably Cripps getting a fair chunk of them.
All right, we'll end our Clayton Oliver love fest there. I'm sure we'll be talking about him a lot more this season. He's just fantastic to watch. Hands down the best Melbourne Football Club player I think I've ever seen play.
Better than Petrarca. Better than second. Max Gawn. Better than Robbie Flower.
Fourth. Well, he's got a premiership, so that...
well, that knocks out Robbie.
All right, let's go to improvements. I don't know how much discussion we need to do on this because I bring it up a lot. I don't know how many times I brought it up in the 6 years that I've been doing this podcast, and I don't think I've ever seen an improvement to this aspect of our game. That's our kicking for goal. It's just woeful. Set shots in particular have been very poor. I always say it's going to cost us a match. I don't know how many matches it's probably cost us. Not as many as I probably think it does.
Not many in the last 17, that's for sure.
Definitely not in the last 17, considering our recent record. It hasn't cost us a game, but it definitely cost percentage. But as you said, what's percentage at the moment when you're winning? Your percentage doesn't matter. But it's one aspect of our game that I really think needs to be addressed. I don't know how you do it, but it isn't. Track is a probably the worst culprit out there at the moment, as good as he is. But yeah, I don't know if there's much need to discuss anything there, unless any of you.
Do you think the problem is more the non-forwards?
Look, it's not Tom McDonald. I think Tom McDonald's a very good kick for goal. He's a very good set shot. Yeah. Ben Brown missed an easy one this week. Didn't get many chances, but he's usually a very good set shot. Wiedemann, well, when he gets the ball, he's a 50-50. But yeah, it's probably more so.
It's Petrarca, I reckon. I blame him for it. He's terrible.
Well, Nibbler misses a lot of set shots, I've noticed.
His first one, though, on the weekend for the season.
Yeah.
They didn't get around him, though.
Max missed a couple.
Max missed, but we don't sort of expect Max to kick them, but he has been kicking them of late. Yeah.
It is frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly, look, percentage is not a big deal, but we could have won that game by a lot more. Maybe I would have been a little bit happier. I don't know.
18% clear of the second team who's on percentage. Percentage isn't really an issue.
Yeah, but I want to be 40% clear.
Yeah.
I can't be that. That little bit extra buffer. George, you were disappointed with the crowd. Are you disappointed with the North supporters, or are you disappointed that Melbourne supporters didn't rock up?
Well, I had COVID, George. Sorry, mate.
Well, forgive you, Bin Man. You had an excuse at least. Look, I think this is a problem for the AFL across the board.
Definitely.
At playing games at 4:35 on a cold afternoon at Marvel Stadium isn't the encouragement to get anybody there at the best of times. But honestly, when you get 13,000 people turning up to a game, and quite honestly, watching the people coming into the ground, if it wasn't at least 5-1 Melbourne supporters and more likely 10-1 Melbourne supporters, I would be very surprised. For North this week, this was a home game for them. They had 13,000 people turn up. Certainly the majority of those were the opposition. Last week, when they played in Tasmania, they had 5,000 turn up to the game. And again, another home game. They're going to be in serious troubles when the home games in successive weeks don't even get 20,000 people turning up. But you look at the other games in the round as well. GWS and West Coast, 5,000 people turned up. Last week or the week before, GWS versus Gold Coast, 4,000 people turn up. Hawthorn played Brisbane this week in Tassie, 12,000 turn up. West Coast, when they played us over in the West with sold out stadiums, have 27,000 people turned up. The Bulldogs and the Suns at Ballarat, 6,000 turn up. These are stadiums that have got empty seats. It's not because there's a limit on the numbers of people who can go into them. I think the AFL's got some serious concerns about the attractiveness of the game, the way it's being presented at the moment. I certainly don't think that all the pre, post, and during the game entertainment does anything whatsoever for the whole spectacle, and probably drives a lot of people away, quite frankly. But I think also people have become used to the comforts of their own home and the comforts of the television coverage, particularly when you've got KO, which is now a lot cheaper than what Foxtel ever used to be. Staying at home is becoming a reasonable sort of option for people, so they're going to have to work very hard to get people back. I don't know how they're going to do it, though.
Yeah, I think, as I said a few weeks ago, I reckon that the marquee games is another thing. People turn out for the big marquee games, and that will happen. But even those numbers are slightly down. I personally think that there's been a change. Just like, as I said a few weeks back, people now 3 days in the office is the sort of standard. I reckon lower footy crowds is also the standard. I think that's, there's once people change habits, it's hard to get them to change them back, I reckon.
Mm.
How many people do you think are going to come to Melbourne Freo this week at 4:35 p.m? And is there a better time slot for that to attract more people?
It's a good question. That's a bad time.
I think if
we'd be lucky to get 25,000, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I would have said if we get 20,000 to that, it would be a good result given what's happening at other games.
Well, given it's a interstate team with no real probably following here, unlike
Brisbane or Sydney.
Yeah, Brisbane or Sydney. Yeah, that's a really good. Like there was the Brisbane game there. Sorry, the Sydney Carlton game. It sounded like there were quite a few Swans fans in there, and that game got 40,000.
Yeah, because Carlton supporters are up and about. They'll
and the Sydney, but we don't have. There's no rump of Freo fans here.
No,
in Melbourne. So
would there have been a better time?
Well, of course, but obviously, it is a funny time, isn't it, for that one? What time is that in Perth? Is that coming into there?
Well, that's 2 p.m., 2:30.
Right, well, that's not such a great time over there either. So, yeah, given it's arguably, two of the top 6 teams. Or
when they fixtured it, it was 2 top 4 teams, first and third when they fixtured it.
Yeah, it is.
They really shunted it.
I mean, I'm happy personally. I don't mind that time. I'd rather that time than a night game because, by the time those night games finish, you're home well after midnight or whatever. So I don't mind that. But you're right. It's a bit of it's a dead time, isn't it?
Mm.
Midnight? How far away from the ground?
Well, the game finishes at 10:30. You've got to get on the train. I know that you get your helicopter home, but I've got to walk into town, get on a train, and then walk from the train station down here. So I know Jeeves come and get you from outside gate 1 and then spirits you home to your chateau. But
I wish. Well, now we'll go on to you, Bin Man. You want to talk about David King?
So now I'm going to take this opportunity to vent. I've been very good all season. I've been phlegmatic and accepting a lot of the commentary, and I fully understand the criticism that I'm opening myself up for, saying if he drives you nuts, what are you doing listening to him? But it's a bit like trolling. Why do you respond to a troll on Demonland? Or why do you, it's like I can't look away sometimes. And so I've been trying not to get too annoyed by him this year. But I finally succumbed this afternoon listening to a recording of that thing he does on the means test, David King's means test on SEN today. And he's all over the shop. I mean, apart from the fact that last year he was predicting the Dogs are going to have a dynasty because of their forward line, it's hard to see them not being the most powerful team for the next 4 or 5 years, was his comment last year on the back of Ugle-Hagan can't even get a game in that team. And the all-powerful, all-seeing Norton. Well, not only hasn't there been a dynasty, they're probably not going to make the 8 the very next year after he said it. So he backed Essendon in, and he's got complete egg all over his face. But what really drove me nuts tonight was, and this is what set me off on the train, fuming listening to it, was this is a fella paid to do his job, paid to analyse football, and he was, of course, pumping up the tyres of Voss and how brilliant the Blues are going, and doesn't everyone love the Blues? And, even my dog Blues. So there you go. He was pumping Voss's tyres up, and he says to Gerard Whateley, you know what there should be? There should be a Coach of the Year award. And if it was, Voss would win it. And Whateley, to his great credit, says, well, there is a Coaches of the Year award. He said, well, Voss should get it. He said, well, you can't give it now. It's only round 10. He said, well, have a Coach of the Month. And he said, well, even if there is a Coaches award, it always goes to the Premiership coach. And Whateley says, well, no, actually, it's hardly ever gone to the Premiership coach. It's usually the one who's made the most improvement during the year. So last year, I forget who won it last year.
Simon Goodwin did win it last year.
Did he? Well, and then David King says something like, right, okay, I didn't know that, which is all fine. No worries. The fact that you didn't know there's an AFL Coaches Award, no probs. It doesn't matter that you've been in the game for God knows how long. But then he says, the ranking, and who does he have number 1? Voss. This is these top 3 coaches in the AFL at this point in time. We're 10 zip. We're 2 clear of the second team. Who does he have second? not Goodwin, Longmuir. And he sneaks Goodwin in at third as coach of the year. I mean, where is this guy's head at? Now, the other thing that really burnt my bacon from his thing today was
Carlton haven't even beaten. Who have they beaten?
They've beaten no one.
Have they beat? I mean, they beat
no one, and
the Swans in the top 5 this week, but in the top 8
and I don't rate the Swans.
But that's it.
So
they haven't beaten anyone else in the top 8. They beat Richmond early in the year when Richmond weren't.
Who aren't in the top 8 now.
Yeah.
Now, he's got this thing where he is, again, Freo, and has been all year. And he's super pro Lions, and he has been all year. And so he doesn't rate Freo. And in talking about that game, he said they've got a big problem. Like, didn't raise any of the issues that it was wet or that they had 20 more contested possessions or that the numbers actually looked all right. But he talked about the issue that they faced. Fine, no worries. But then he talked about the Brisbane game and said he gave them a complete free pass. The question was, well, how did you rate Brisbane's loss? And he said, well, it's one, no worries. It's a free get. They're going to lose some during the season. If you were going to lose some and looked at the thing beforehand, you would think playing down in Tassie would be the one they lost. No problems at all. Just normal reset. The messaging's fine. But I think quite the contrary. In fact, that was a really, really bad loss on a number of levels by the Lions. And I can't believe, leaving aside my angst with David King, I can't actually believe they've not copped more for it, Brisbane. One thing that may well be the difference between them finishing top 2. If they don't finish top 2, they're travelling, and they're going to travel to either Melbourne, possibly Melbourne or Perth. So it's a massive, massive game, a bad loss, a game they should have won. But the biggest problem, and I can't believe King didn't point this out, he said there's no problems at all from Brisbane. Huge problem. They gave up 117 points. And that's because if you look at the way the Hawks played, they played like they tried to play against us. They played all of that stuff that I was talking about post that game, diagonally trying to get through the corridor, moving it quickly, but moving it forward at the same time, not wasting kicks laterally and allowing Brisbane to set up ahead of the ball. And they carved Brisbane up. It was a super entertaining game to watch, and I really enjoyed it. But I actually came away way, way more worried about where Brisbane's heading than Freo. Freo I'll get to in terms of when we talk about next week's game. But it was a wet, sodden game where they just physically got smashed by a stronger team. Brisbane are playing on a perfect deck down in Freo against an up-and-coming team, but no top 8 certainty. And they got picked apart. Their defence was beyond problematic. So I'm really surprised that King's given them a pass. But so leaving aside my angst with him, I actually puts a big question mark for me over Brisbane's bona fides in terms of being a competitive team against us. Sure, you lose matches, and he made that point. Every team loses matches, and that's true, but it's the manner in which they lost. Because the ferocity was up, the contested possession numbers were high, is that they just could not stop Hawthorn scoring. It was I thought a really big alarm bells went off for me. But getting back to David King, it's the last time I'll mention him all season.
Well, I bet you won't, but he's because I reckon when we have a loss, his knives will come out for us. You watch. He won't give us a pass. I bet you if we lose, he'll find something to say we're cooked.
And one of the other narratives he's been pushing, which really actually frustrates me no end, is he's talking about Melbourne travelling in first gear and only flipping the switch for a little while when we need it. And I've heard a number of commentators saying, and again, I think it just shows a complete lack of understanding in the way we play. And again, North Melbourne, Goody, you just got to listen to what Goody says. Is Melbourne's got this model now, is in fact we're responsive to the opposition. And so if they lift their rating, then we respond to what they're doing. And North Melbourne, for a period in that game, as you guys have seen, it would have been frustrating watching, they looked to control the footy, moving it left and right. We are happy to allow the opposition to do that. If they're not moving the ball down the field, they can do that till the cows come home. That doesn't mean we're not attacking. It doesn't mean we're disrespecting the opposition. It doesn't mean that we haven't got the foot in their throat. It means that we are responding to what the opposition are doing rather than looking to be the alpha dog imposing ourselves the whole way through the match. they can't score from the half-back flank. So they can spend 5-6 minutes bouncing it back and forward all they like. It's not going to bother Melbourne. And I want some commentators to start noting that rather than just going, Melbourne didn't have their pedal to the metal from the moment the ball was bounced right to the match. It just seems like, that's pretty obvious the way we play. Commentators should be noting at this point of the journey.
They had 55 more marks than us, and that was because they were just shipping around there. They're getting 5 meters, 10 meters.
Exactly. And that's what we did a lot under Roos, because Roos was clear is that you don't want to get smashed by 100 points. You don't want to go into a match. It's no good for anyone, particularly a team like North, but Melbourne when Roos came on board. We're in similar position as we talked about last week. You cannot manage multiple 100-point losses in a season. It destroys football clubs. So if you're going to, the best way to do that against Melbourne is to be fierce all the way through. And the second best is to combine ferocity with holding onto the footy. And you're exactly right. They had heaps of uncontested possessions, but we allowed them to, not because it was some failing on our part, but because that's the way we play footy. And someone like David King should be making that point. That's what we're doing. We're showing the opposition respect, which is what Goody always talks about. We respond to what they throw at us.
I get the feeling maybe he's not such a great commentator.
Probably doesn't quite fit under improvements, but I just need it was either that or go crazy. So sorry, Demon Landers.
Sometimes it doesn't have to necessarily be an improvement from our game.
My health has improved. How's that?
Including positives, because there's going to be times when we have a stinker of a game, and there's not going to be many or any positives coming out of the game. So yes, we have some latitude on what we can talk about. There was no Casey game this week, so let's get straight into the ins and outs. We haven't, when I wrote these notes today, we hadn't seen an injury report. We have had the injury report come in this week, and the club, in regards to Ed Langdon, the club claims that there is no internal damage. However, there is some damage to the ribs. Apparently, he was out on the training track today. I doubt that he was involved in any contact work, as I mentioned before. They said he's got every chance to play. I don't think he's going to play this week. I'll get your thoughts in a minute. They didn't mention anything about Tom McDonald, who did finish the match on the bench. And at the time I wrote this, we didn't know the severity of Jack Viney's hamstring, which ruled him out of the match against the Kangaroos. The official line at the time was hamstring awareness, which they're saying now. He is back training, and they'll sort of assess where he's at. So he's no certainty to play this week either. The other news that they said today was that Salem's still not. I thought maybe he'd be back, not necessarily playing seniors this week, but it seems like he's still another week or so away from playing. But Hibberd is back training. But I'm sure he'll have to play in the twos before he comes back. What changes, guys, do you think we'll make? Maybe, George, I'll start with you. And in particular, I don't think Langdon's going to play. So how do we cover that? He's been such a crucial part of our team and the way we play. So how are we going to cover that one?
Yeah, I've really got the choice ones this week, and I don't know that people should listen to what our predictions are, given our performance in the last couple of weeks. But anyhow, yeah, I doubt very much whether Langdon will play. If you're trying to read between the lines, he's got a broken rib. There is no cure for that. Effectively, you can strap it up, but it's not like something you like other injuries where you repair and try and physically get it better. It just has to be left. It will get better of its own accord, and in fact, it won't get any worse. But you know what will happen? He'll get targeted. He might, as other players have done in the past, strap it up to a certain extent to give it some protection. But it's not going to affect the way he's playing. But I doubt that he'll play. There's no point in risking a player who's so critical to our ability to move the ball from one end of the ground to the other, and the amount of pressure that he provides. That creates the next big question. What do we do without Ed on the wing? Quite frankly, Melcham was a complete disaster.
Yeah, he can't play there.
He can't play there. He had seven possessions in total. While he kicked a goal, it was a typical Melcham goal. Don't do any work. Get somebody else to do the work, and I'll kick it for you. But the
It was a nice goal,
real,
though.
It was
nice goal.
It's a standard Melksham goal.
It's absolutely standard, yeah. But when you compare it to what James Jordan was doing on the other wing, it was quite chalk and cheese. So who do we put in that role? Well, Oscar Baker can run almost the same amounts as Ed Langdon, but he's a horrible kick, quite frankly. And I don't know that he's ready to fill the gap. I really don't know who we're going to use in that role. It's going to be very, very difficult. The question is just as equally going to be about, does Viney come back in this week? I don't know. Again, it depends on the injury situation. Bedford did more than enough to keep his spot in the side. I thought Dunstan's not a Viney but he's, I think, still did more than enough in the middle, and we certainly do need those inside grunt players. Does Harms come back? Probably not at this stage.
He's 2-3 weeks away, I think.
Yeah, so Bedford, Dunstan, I suspect, is going to stay in, but the real question is about what do we do on the wing. I just don't know. I really don't know what we're going to do there.
I mean, if we had Salem or Hibbard, I guess you can put them back and then play Gus on a wing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And try and get that same similar role he knows.
You could just. There's no. I mean, you could move Gus back, and you've got halfback flanker. So there's not. I mean, Gus would presumably go back to the wing, won't he, to play that role, and then you just need to slot in a halfback flanker.
Well, who's the halfback flanker? Is the question.
You could move. You
could bring Tomlinson back.
You could bring Jordan back to the halfback flank and bring in a Baker for the wing for that position, and they might do that because it did occur to me last week. Someone put on Demonland, and I thought it was I think Mo64. It was a really good comment actually. That if you that whole notion that they mirror at Casey and they've got players who are designated. So from that logic, in fact, Bedford probably, Melksham arguably was the closer player to a Harms in the sense that he can play high half forward, play some minutes in the middle. Maybe he's the one. And, if you're looking at a winger, but Baker, having said that, Baker's gone to the halfback flank. He's not playing wing at Casey at the moment. So, it's an interesting.
Is that Baker or Rosman? Because
Rosman's gone back too, but Baker was on the halfback flank last year. Maybe he's gone back to the wing this year.
He's been doing a fair bit of work down the wing, but he just hasn't got the finishing capabilities that we need. I don't know that they want to.
No,
look, I just don't know. He's got fantastic running ability. He's got the ability to get the ball. He goes to the right spots. His delivery is just awful at times.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe given you might be right. They might be loath to move Gus. I think probably just leaving is Langers probably will play because unless he's really injured, I mean, he is injured, but unless they think it's going to make it worse, the history's been playing through injuries. So he trained today, apparently. I read on Demonland.
There was a 10 seconds shot on Channel 9 News tonight. He didn't look like he was at training. I think that was about the limit of it.
Right. Okay.
He was just smiling and talking to others, as in, I'm not in hospital, guys. But wasn't him out on the track kicking the ball around.
But it might be. I mean, it might be more prudent given how influential Gus has been on the halfback flank. You're probably robbing Peter to pay Paul, and maybe Baker is the obvious one to come in. He's not Langdon and he's not as fit as Langdon, but he'll give you a run and, he on that boundary line thing, really, all he has to do is perfect the Langdon kick across the body from about 50 metres in towards the corridor that he does. That's really the Langdon special. So
I was just bringing up the Melbourne injury report. Yeah.
So, I mean, Gus, they would be loath to move Gus from the halfback flank without Salem there because he's been such a steadying influence in a big game. you need some kilometres, I guess, if you're going to replace. That's probably the other question: who can run the sort of kilometres? So Jordan can probably. Bedford probably is not a natural winger, is he? But he's got a good tank apparently. So it will be interesting to see what they do. It's Gus to the wing would be the other one, but maybe that would be robbing a bit of Peter to pay Paul. And I'm not going to make any predictions this week anyway.
All right, well then we'll move on. B-Man, you kept a close eye on the Dockers match against Collingwood, which saw the Magpies upset the Dockers on their home turf by 6 goals. This is the Dockers' second loss on the trot after an impressive start to the season. They had been touted by many as a contender for our own crown, particularly because they appear to have copied our style of play. What can we expect from the Dockers when they travel across the Nullarbor this week?
This is a huge game for Freo and for us. I mean, they're a legitimate contender. They're definitely a top 4 chance. The shine has come off in the last couple of weeks, but a couple of really important caveats on both games, and I watched both games, is that, or 2 caveats. The first one is that both games were in atrocious conditions. Both games were wet and slippery, but particularly the one in Perth, the ground was in terrible condition. And to be honest, I don't think Freo adjusted very well on either game to the conditions. They've got a lot of similarities to us, and they're thrown up in the numbers, which is what people have compared them to us in terms of their systems. So the major sort of similarity to us is the way they defend, and that all-team defence, and that the buy-in from all of their players, and sort of reflecting that all-team defence. They're ranked first in least opponents inside 50s per game, which is a bit different to us because we allow the ball inside and they keep it out, so they set up a bit higher to prevent that. They're ranked first in least opponent goal assists per game, which I thought was interesting because it really shows how hard they work outside the contest to cut off that, to pressure the ball carrier. Most of those goal assists, a big proportion of them are when a player's unpressured and they're able to kick into a forward line. A player like McRae with no pressure will hit up a Norton, for instance. They're ranked 5th in handballs per game, so they're a high handball team, which was one of the things that they didn't adjust in the last couple of weeks. They're ranked 3rd in tackles, which talks to their pressure, similar to us, sorts of numbers to us. An interesting one I think is really important is they're ranked 5th in hitouts per game, and Darcy is an excellent young player, and it gives them an advantage like we get an advantage. The 4th in the least opponent kicks per game. That in terms of the way they force teams to sort of get to handball it around as well. And I guess the big one is the 2nd least opponent points per game, which points to how effective they are in terms of their defensive strength. There are some significant difference to the way they play and the way we play, one of which is they switch the ball a lot more. They have a really high number of handballs compared to us. They struggle to rebound from 50, whether that's a game plan or it's just a weakness. They do. So they're 18th in rebounds, 50s per game. I'm actually sure where we are on that stat, but I'm pretty confident we're a lot higher than that. But in particular, their big difference to us is their they control the ball with hands and they're prepared to move it laterally, whereas we, as we've talked about a lot, when in doubt, we go forward. We will, of course, go lateral, but if you look at it, we're looking lateral on the diagonal, whereas they're prepared to go lateral straight across the ground. They really look to make the ground big and stretch opposition defences, and that's the way they get around them. But that is quite a significant difference to us. And I think that was a big factor in these last 2 losses, is that they broke down, Collingwood in particular, but Port as well, is their ferocity at the contest really broke down those handball chains. And we've seen that impact even against a really high-quality handball team like the Dogs. Under finals-like intense pressure, it breaks down. The other thing that was really disappointing from a Freo perspective is Collingwood's physical pressure, physical. They won the contested possession count Freo by 20 in this match. So it wasn't like that they didn't come to play, but Collingwood smashed them in ground ball gets, and their small forwards went to work. And I thought that was an interesting parallel to the way we play, because small forwards are where we struggle. Partly because I was thinking that through a bit, is that the strength of our defensive system is similar to theirs, is they get across and help out a lot and zone off. And that's super effective against talls, but it's much less effective, obviously, when the ball hits the ground. So Collingwood have got Ginnivan, and they've got a number of really good small mediums who will hurt most teams, but keeping in mind it was wet as well. So the ball was hitting the deck a lot. And they were blown off the park by their small forwards. Similar problem for us. The other... So that concern for them was a bit like the pressure that they dialed up. They still met them with contested pressure, but they weren't able to get through. They weren't able to transition the ball at all against the Pies. The Pies had that game by the throat, and they could never get any flow. Now, the wet weather didn't help, and it didn't help the previous week. But the other thing that had sort of occurred to me is, whilst they're definitely on the up, and I rate them highly, 2 wet games, I wouldn't be, wouldn't definitely be jumping off them. But the other big gap, so, comparing Melbourne and them, is that they're following. They've got Sean Darcy, who's a rate super highly, but their midfield is Will Brodie, Caleb Sarong. Mundy's a champion, but he's the wrong side of 30. They've got Banford and Collier, Michael Waters and Rory Lobb and Schultz on the half forward line.
They've got a bloke called Brayshaw as well.
And Brayshaw. But, you can't, there's no comparison to us, is there? So, that's not a bad midfield. It's okay, but it's no comparison to us. And Darcy's a good ruckman too, but he's, So I guess all of that is to saying is that I definitely rate them. I'm really looking forward to this match. The way our two teams match up will be really interesting. I'll be really curious to see how aggressive Freo are. They'll look to really spread us at the G, which works against a lot of teams, and that's why they do it. But our strength is our ability to get our defensive zone across. Then, the physical nature of it is the other thing that I came away from that Collingwood game, is that Melbourne will be every inch at the contest and physical as Collingwood were. And it really puts a big question mark for me over, their capacity for those big games. I mean, I think that they're on the way up, but the bigger thing for me, I think, and also my sort of big question mark over Brisbane, who I have bigger question marks than I do over Freo, is if they're the two contenders, there's a big gap between us and those two contenders. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they play. They've got one of those situations where they will have been pounded over there in over in Western Australia, because they're the great white hope over there. A lot of fans would have got ahead of themselves. They're now playing the real contenders this week. So it's a genuine should-be game of the round. You're totally right, Andy. 4:35 is like, talk about bearing the lead. I'll be really curious to see how they go about trying to stretch us and what sort of tactical work they put into us. It'll be interesting to see who they elect to tag. If they tag, they may not at all. The biggest concern I would have from a general perspective from Freo is actually their ability to put a big enough score on. So going back to that thing, you just got to score 75 points minimum against Melbourne, because even if you have just a brilliant day defensively, on a good day at the G, you're going to do pretty well to keep us under 75 points. So 75 points there. And the question is, have they got the capacity to score more than 75 points? That would be the big question mark on them. Just on the odds for this game there, if they're the contenders, one of the contenders, we're $1.22 to win this game of footy. Last year, by way of comparison, to come into the first round, when we played Freo in round 1 last year, we were $1.75 and they were $2. So it just shows, they're a team that's rated pretty highly. They're third favourite for the flag, and yet we're starting this game of footy against them on Saturday at $1.22, which is, shorter than what it was for a Labor victory on Saturday.
It's going to be a ripper of a game. I think the midfield's going to be critical with Darcy and Lobb versus Jackson and Gawn. And then when you've got Petrarca and Oliver and Brayshaw all in the same centre square as well, it's going to be a great contest. But I think the game against Collingwood is not going to put them in a good spot simply because it was so wet and so slogging.
It was
I think
slogging.
it'll drain them when you're coming up against the top side in the competition. I think they'll see the after effects this week.
I totally agree. And again, it's such an underrated part of footy is they were coming off the game against the Suns in the humidity and all of the things that we struggled the week after playing the Suns. They struggled. They looked flat in that game against Collingwood. They never got – the conditions didn't help, but you're totally right. So it's not just 1 week. They've gone to Brisbane. They've had to fly back over the country. They've played a hugely sapping game against Brisbane, only to come up against the Pies in red-hot physical form in, as you say, the wet, slogging conditions. That's 2 hard weeks in a row. Then now they've got to fly back over the other side of the country to play the reigning premiers on their own deck. It's a pretty big 2-3 weeks, and they'll also be getting to that point where they'll be looking to the bye. They're a younger team generally. It just really shows the sort of things we talked about last year. It's a 6-7 year journey, isn't it, to get where you are? There's no shortcuts to shortcut to get where the D's are now.
Do we know if Nat Fyfe is back this week?
Well, I read on Demonland someone said that they're going to rush him back, but I hope they do.
He could be.
It would strike me as a sign of desperation if they do, because he hasn't played a game this season, has he?
No.
So if you want to have been trading the house down to come in for the, against this game.
They mentioned on the broadcast the other day that he was still 1 or 2 weeks away, but that was BT or someone. So I don't know how much I can trust his thing. He was just reading probably off something.
He's more trustworthy than David King, isn't he?
Yeah, well, their last updated injury list was Tuesday, 17th of May, and it just said Nat Fyfe back, TBA. So we'll see.
The other interesting thing about the conditions both weeks that made me wonder about their game plan is that they were playing, I hadn't sort of fully appreciated how much they rely on that outside handball to get those chains of handball. And they, like I said, they were playing, they kept on trying to play that style. And I remember when Melbourne 2 or 3 years ago, even when we started our rise up, we played poorly in the wet. Now our game plan is much more suited to the wet, but we've got the skilled players as well, haven't we?
We've got Terence on the line. I just, guys, give me a thumbs up if you can hear Terence when he comes up. Terence, g'day, how are you?
Hello, Andy. I can hear you perfectly well, by the way.
Oh, fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Great. So it's nice to be able to call in without making this about me. I was travelling back from Dublin, where I study, over the weekend by car ferry, and coming back from France into Brussels on Saturday. So I didn't get to actually see the game being played live, and because I was driving, I just I put on Fox and listened to the audio. So which raised a question for me. So we've talked about Selwyn talking about our injuries, but I did hear, if I heard correctly, that during the course of the game, Petrarca was a little bit sore for a while. Lever was a little bit sore for a while, I thought, and there was one other who I can't remember. I mean, Rachel got knocked around a little bit. So my question to the group is whether we have any concerns. I know the next 3 weeks are going to be really difficult, and then we have to buy. I'm just interested to look forward to see how we're going to manage not only possible niggles, if you like, that are not necessarily being reported. And as Binman talked about last year, the fact that probably after the buy we'll start to load. And so we're going to probably see some fairly, I don't know, average performances, but performances impacted by a load. I'm just interested on what you guys think about that. And then let me give you the second question while you can still hear me. And I know you've tried awfully hard to get people from the club to talk, but I happened to listen to Adam Use on a podcast that will remain unnamed a few weeks ago, and he was terrific. So any chance of being able to get him, and then I was really few minutes that we got on the Melbourne website of Choco Williams talking about DNA guys. So again, just some opportunity to be able to get some insights would really be terrific. And as I say, I know you're trying, but just some encouragement. And I guess as listeners to the podcast, what can we do to motivate the club to give you access to some of these really important people? Over to you, Andy.
Well, I think I'm not sure where you heard Adamuze, but we did interview Adamuze on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, which you can get from any of your podcasts.
So I apologise. I did hear it then, and I'm not going to who the other one was, but again, a really interesting into some of the players. So I apologise that I got it wrong, but anything that you can do to be able to get them on, and whatever we can do to help in encouraging the club to make them available to you would be terrific.
No, there's nothing really that the audience can do. I've got a pretty good relationship with the club, and it's I haven't reached out to sort of get someone on just because of been busy with stuff in my own personal life, but we'll get back onto that as soon as possible. Boys, did you have anything else you wanted to in relation to anything Terence said about the loading and stuff like that? B-Man, you're usually all over that.
Oh, I just think more of the Terence's question around management. I think that what we can just look to what we've done as evidence of what we're likely to do in the future. And one of them is not resting players. Like this time last year in the lead up to the bye, we were a couple of weeks away, I guess, from the bye, but we were all saying, and I was saying, well, look, I'd rest half the team at this point and give them a chop out over the bye. And we had plenty of players who could have desperately done with one. As I said a couple of weeks ago, Maxi had his neck problem going to Adelaide, and also in 2019, actually, now that I think, 2020, the same thing happened where Maxi was pretty seriously injured, and there was that conversation. I think it's pretty clear that Selwyn's this is taking a line through Burgess, that resilience is key. That's why I think there's actually a very good chance that they won't rest Langers this week, because they're not. I mean, you can see. Lever was the first time he looked unencumbered. I thought he looked okay on the weekend, and Rivers is starting to finally look like he's not carrying a niggle. Track, similarly, he's not got any strapping on his knee. They look like they're all playing through their niggles. That's what happened last year. So my answer, Terence, is that I suspect that they won't do anything different. They'll keep selecting players unless there's an injury. The only real example last year of them resting anyone, and that was Salem, where they could have perhaps played him, but they gave him a chop out against Adelaide with the view to making sure that he was available for the Dogs game the following week. But that was about the only example all last season of them resting a player, other than dropping Brown back, which wasn't really resting, to tell him, and doing that sort of mini pre-season. So I suspect they will stick to what they've been doing, select the best 22 niggles. General soreness won't be a reason to come out of the side. And as Goody keeps saying, they won't take any risks. If there's a genuine injury, they're not going to play anyone who's injured. But I can't see them resting anyone.
Thank you. I appreciate the insight. So, Andy, I'll hand back to you, and I'll let you go, okay?
Thank you, Terence.
Good on you, Terence.
Cool. That was Terence in Belgium. Always good to hear from him. But Terence, if you are still listening, I have put a link into our chat room. If you go to, or anyone listening, if you go to demonland.com/Uze, or any of the podcast apps on Apple or Google, you will be able to find that interview that we did with Adamuze. It was a pretty good interview.
And are we going to forgive Terence for listening to another Melbourne podcast?
Well, that's fine. The more Melbourne contact, the better. I don't begrudge anyone wanting to get some more Demons content.
Just don't listen to David King, Terence. Just stop that.
All right, boys. Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for now. Thank you, B-Man. Thank you, George. Thank you, Terence. Thank you, all of you, for listening in. We'll be back next week to discuss the match against the Dockers. Hopefully we come away with a win. Let's go Demons.
Go Red Legs.
Come on,